My husband's hands had always been the warmest thing I'd ever known. Broad and calloused from 30 years of laying tile, they could cup my face like I was something precious. When he died of a heart attack at 64, I sat in the hospital parking lot for 2 hours before I could drive home. Not because I was too grief-stricken to function, though I was, but because I suddenly understood that the house on Birchwood Lane would never feel warm again. I was 66 years old, and the savings we'd built over 4 decades together turned out to be more fragile than we'd believed. My husband had been the bookkeeper of our lives, meticulous and proud of it, and when his sister helped me go through the accounts, we found a second mortgage I hadn't known about, taken out 3 years earlier when the tile work slowed down and he hadn't wanted to worry me. He was that kind of man. He carried things quietly so I wouldn't have to. So I found myself standing in the lobby of the Hargrove County Administration Building in Clover, South Carolina, shaking hands with a woman named Donna who ran the county land records department. I had a library science degree from 1983 and a lifetime of organizing a classroom. Donna said that was more than enough. The evening shift ran from 4 in the afternoon until 9 at night, Tuesday through Saturday. The building was mostly empty by 5, just a skeleton crew finishing up what the day shift hadn't. I cataloged deeds, cross-referenced parcel numbers, and digitized paper records that had been sitting in storage since the 1970s. It wasn't what I'd planned for my 60s, but the county health insurance was good, and the work kept me from sitting alone in a house that smelled like my husband's aftershave. That's how I met Marcus. He was the night security guard, 60 years old, with a shaved head going silver at the temples and a posture so straight it made you think he'd spent time in the military, which he had. 20 years Army, he told me eventually. 2 tours in the Gulf. He ran the evening rounds with the same quiet efficiency he probably used for everything. Checking doors, signing logs, never making more noise than necessary. Most of the staff from the day shift barely acknowledged him. I noticed that immediately. The first time I spoke to him beyond a nod was a Tuesday in early March. I'd baked a peach cobbler that weekend, too much of it, as I always did since I was no longer cooking for 2. I brought a portion in a foil container and held it out to him at his desk near the main entrance. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he's not sure he's allowed to want. "I made too much," I said. "I'm Patricia, Records Department." "I know," he said. "I've seen you coming in." Marcus. He took the cobbler. The following Thursday, I brought banana bread. The week after that, lemon squares. By April, it had become a quiet ritual between us. I'd arrive, hand him whatever I'd wrapped in foil, and we'd exchange a few words while I signed the employee log. He'd update me on anything unusual in the building. I'd tell him something small and ordinary about my week. Then I'd go upstairs, and he'd continue his rounds. I learned gradually, the way you learn things about people who don't volunteer information easily. His son, Derek, was 32 and lived in Colombia. They hadn't spoken in almost 3 years, not since an argument at a family gathering that Marcus described only as something that got out of hand. His ex-wife had remarried. He lived in a rented room above a hardware store on Cedar Avenue and drove a truck that needed a new transmission. "You ever think about calling him?" I asked one evening in May, meaning Derek. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Every day," he said, "but I think I need to be someone worth calling first." I didn't press. I understood that kind of sentence. It held years inside it. What I didn't understand then was that Marcus had been paying very close attention to something for weeks, something that had nothing to do with peach cobbler or banana bread, something he was trying to decide whether to tell me. The building where we worked sat at the corner of Macon Street and Route 9, in a neighborhood that was quiet during the day and quieter at night. The parking lot behind the building held maybe 30 spaces, poorly lit at the far end, and I always parked under the lamp nearest the employee entrance because my daughter had taught me to do that when I started working evenings. The same 2 or 3 cars were usually still there when I left at 9. Marcus's truck, the cleaning crew's van, and occasionally a car belonging to one of the other record staff who worked late. But in April, a car I didn't recognize had begun appearing in the lot. A dark green sedan. Always parked at the far end where the lights didn't reach well. It was there some nights and not others. Never in the same spot twice. And whoever drove it seemed to arrive after I did and leave before I did, so I never saw them. I hadn't noticed it at all. Marcus had. He'd noticed it the second time it appeared. By the 4th, he'd written down the license plate number in a small notebook he kept in his breast pocket. By the 6th, he'd begun timing it. The car arrived between 7:30 and 8, always on the nights I worked, and was gone by the time I walked to my car at 9. He didn't tell me because he wasn't certain yet. Marcus was the kind of man who required certainty before he spoke. On a Thursday evening in the 3rd week of June, I came downstairs at 8:45 to retrieve a file I'd left in the copy room. Marcus was standing at the window overlooking the parking lot, his posture different from usual, stiff, alert. "Patricia," he said, without turning around, "come look at this, but don't stand in front of the glass." I stepped to the side of the window and looked out. The parking lot was mostly dark, my car a pale shape under the nearest lamp. At the far end, just barely visible, was the green sedan. And leaning against the building's exterior wall, maybe 20 feet from my car, was a man. He was looking directly at my car, just standing there, watching it, with the patient stillness of someone who had done this before. My mouth went dry. "Who is that?" "I was hoping you could tell me." I looked more carefully. He was average height, wearing a gray jacket, maybe mid-50s. I could see the side of his face when he turned slightly. Something stirred in the back of my mind but didn't quite surface. "I don't know," I said. "I don't think I know him." "His car has been in this lot 11 times in the past 9 weeks, Marcus said. "Always on nights you work. Always gone before you leave. Tonight, he didn't leave." 11 times. I repeated the number like it might mean something different if I heard it twice. "Come sit down," Marcus said. "There's more." We sat in the 2 chairs beside his desk. He opened his notebook and laid it on the table between us, pages filled with his neat, military handwriting, dates, times, license plate number, notes. "I ran the plate through a friend at the sheriff's department," he said. Informally. "The car belongs to a man named Glenn Hartwell. He lives on Sycamore Road. Do you know where that is?" I went very still. Sycamore Road ran behind the neighborhood where I lived. It was 2 streets over from Birchwood Lane. 2 streets. "He's practically my neighbor," I said. Marcus nodded. "I know." I looked up the address. "But I don't know him. I don't think I've ever spoken to him." I was searching my memory hard now, and then something did surface. A man at the end of the block last autumn, watching the houses. I'd thought he was a real estate agent. In this market, people walked through neighborhoods all the time, assessing, why would he be watching my car? Marcus closed the notebook. "I think the better question is why he's been watching you." I felt the word watching land somewhere cold inside my chest. Marcus told me what he'd observed. For the past 2 months, he'd begun extending his evening rounds to include a loop through the parking lot every 30 minutes. He'd seen the green sedan from different angles, different nights. 2 weeks ago, he'd stayed late after his shift and sat in his truck in the far corner of the lot. The sedan had arrived at 7:50. The man had gotten out and stood near my car for almost 15 minutes before getting back in and driving away. "I should have told you sooner," Marcus said, and his jaw tightened in a way that suggested this cost him something to admit. "I didn't want to frighten you over something I wasn't sure about, but I'm sure now." "What do we do?" My voice was steadier than I expected. "We go to the sheriff's office tonight." "Not tomorrow. Tonight before you drive home." "Marcus, it's almost 9 o'clock. "I know what time it is." He looked at me directly, and there was something in his face that had moved past caution into something firmer. "Patricia, this man knows what nights you work and what time you leave. He's been here 11 times. Something made him start doing this, and I think it might have to do with where you work." I went quiet. I turned that over. "Where I work? The County Land Records Department. Deed transfers, property titles, parcel histories. The kind of records that documented who owned what, who had sold what, and when. 2 months ago, my supervisor Donna had flagged an anomaly. A cluster of properties on the southeast side of the county, mostly older homes, mostly owned by elderly residents, or their estates had been transferred in the past 18 months using what appeared to be notarized quitclaim deeds, quick, clean transfers. But several of the original owners, or their surviving family members, had come into our office confused, saying they hadn't signed anything, hadn't sold anything, didn't recognize the names of the new LLCs listed as buyers. Donna had quietly begun pulling the paper files, comparing original signatures against the notarized copies. She'd asked me to help with the cross-referencing because I was careful and I was discreet. I'd been working on it steadily for 6 weeks. We had a list of 14 properties so far that didn't add up. One of those properties was on Sycamore Road. I said the address out loud. Marcus watched my face. "You know something?" "I think I might," I said slowly. "I need to think about this very carefully before I say it out loud." I looked at him. "Did your friend at the sheriff's office, do you trust him?" "With my life," Marcus said. "We served together." "Then yes," I said. "Let's go tonight." Marcus drove me in his truck, following my car so I wouldn't have to leave it alone in the lot. The man in the gray jacket was gone by the time we walked out. The green sedan vanished from the far corner. But Marcus stayed close until we were both in our vehicles, and he kept my taillights in his headlights the entire drive to the sheriff's substation on Route 12. His friend was a detective named Carl, broad-shouldered and unhurried, who poured us both coffee without being asked and listened without interrupting. Marcus laid the notebook on the desk. I explained what I could about the record's irregularities without revealing specifics I wasn't authorized to share, enough to establish that my work had recently touched something sensitive. Carl's expression changed when I mentioned quitclaim deed fraud, not dramatically, but enough. "We've had 2 families come in separately in the past month saying similar things," he said carefully. "We've been looking into it, quietly." He glanced at the notebook. "You've been documenting this since April?" "Since the second time I saw the car," Marcus said. Carl studied him for a moment. "Good instincts." "I've had reasons to develop them," Marcus said. Carl took a photograph of every page in the notebook and made a call from a separate office while we sat with our coffee. When he came back, he told me that they were going to send a car past my house that night and that I should call him directly, on the cell number he wrote on a card, if I noticed anything unfamiliar on my street. He asked me to speak with my supervisor first thing in the morning about escalating the records audit through official channels. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "The property fraud?" Carl measured his answer. "Long enough that whoever is running it has gotten comfortable. Comfortable people get careless, and careless people do things like sit in parking lots watching the people they're worried about." He looked at me steadily. "You're not in danger tonight, but you need to take this seriously." "I am taking it seriously," I said. "I've been taking it seriously for the last 20 minutes. He almost smiled. Marcus drove behind me all the way home to Birchwood Lane. He waited at the curb until I was inside with the lights on, then gave a single honk and drove away. I stood in my kitchen with the lights blazing and called my daughter in Raleigh, not to tell her everything, just to hear her voice. She asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. She said I didn't sound fine. I said I was working on it. I didn't sleep well. I lay in the dark and thought about those 14 properties. I thought about elderly people who'd grown up in their houses, paid them off over decades, and then one day found that a piece of paper had taken those houses away. I thought about a man in a gray jacket standing next to my car in the dark, patient and still, watching. I called Donna at 7 in the morning before she'd even had her coffee. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "I'm calling the county attorney's office right now. Don't touch the files. Don't move anything. And Patricia, don't discuss this with anyone else in the building until I tell you it's safe to." "Is it not safe?" Another pause. "We don't know yet who else might be connected to this. The notary stamps on those deeds belong to a licensed notary in the county. I haven't determined yet whether that person is involved willingly or whether their credentials were stolen." I thought about that on the drive-in, about how far something like this could reach. The investigation moved faster than I expected and slower than it felt like from the inside. The county attorney's office came in quietly that Friday afternoon, 2 attorneys and a forensic accountant, and spent 3 hours in Donna's office with the door closed. The following Monday, state investigators arrived. I gave a formal statement about the records work I'd been doing, the properties I'd flagged, the dates and methods I'd used to cross-reference signatures. Glenn Hartwell, it turned out, was the operations manager for a property management company called Coastal Equity Partners, which existed primarily as a paper entity, an LLC registered in Delaware, with a registered agent address in a strip mall in Charleston. He and 2 associates had been running the scheme for almost 3 years, targeting homeowners over 70 who lived alone, or estates with heirs scattered out of state who weren't paying close attention. They'd recruited a notary named William Foss, who'd agreed to stamp documents he hadn't witnessed in exchange for a flat fee per transaction. 22 properties, transfers totaling just over $3.4 million. 3 of the original owners had died not knowing what had happened to their homes. Their children had been fighting probate battles they didn't understand. When the investigator told me this, I had to set down my coffee cup because my hands had gone unsteady. Glenn Hartwell had learned about the county records review through William Foss, who had a contact in the building services contractor that cleaned our floor. He'd known for over 2 months that someone in the land records department was quietly auditing deed transfers. He hadn't known which records clerk was doing the cross-referencing until Foss's contact identified me by name. That was when the parking lot visits started. He'd been trying to determine my routine, when I arrived, when I left, whether I ever took paper files home. He'd driven past my house on Birchwood Lane on 3 occasions. The investigator showed me traffic camera footage from the corner of my street, the green sedan, rolling slowly, at 10:15 on a Tuesday night 2 weeks earlier. I had been at work. My house had been empty. What was he going to do? I asked. The investigator, a composed woman named Agent Tran, who looked about 40 and never seemed to hurry, said simply, "Determine what you knew and how much of a problem you were going to be for him." I understood what that meant without needing it explained further. Hartwell was arrested on a Friday morning at his home in Clover. Foss was picked up the same afternoon at his notary office. A third man, a title company employee named Ray Dupree, who had facilitated the transfers, turned himself in with an attorney by 3 o'clock. I learned all of this from Carl, who called Marcus first, and then Marcus called me. I was in my kitchen making dinner when my phone rang, and Marcus told me. I sat down on the floor, which is not something I'd done since I was a small child, and I sat there for a while with my back against the cabinet and the phone in my lap. The next day was Saturday, and I didn't work. I drove to the sheriff's substation and asked to speak with Carl. I wanted to know about the homeowners, the ones who were still alive and hadn't yet recovered their properties. He walked me through it carefully. The state had a process for unwinding fraudulent transfers. It would take time, but the legal mechanism existed. 3 families had already been contacted. An advocacy organization that worked with elder financial abuse victims was being looped in. I drove home along a route that took me past Sycamore Road. I slowed at the corner but didn't turn. Someone's clean laundry was on a line in a backyard. Someone's American flag stood still in the windless morning. I thought about all the ordinary things that could happen behind the facades of houses while their owners were unaware of what was being done to them. On Monday evening, back at work, I brought Marcus a full casserole dish of chicken and rice. He looked at it and then looked at me. "That's a lot of food," he said. "It's a lot of gratitude," I said. He set it on the desk and was quiet for a moment in the particular way he had when he was deciding whether to say something. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "About the car. I kept waiting until I was sure, but I waited too long. You had a right to know sooner. You told me when it mattered," I said. "He hadn't been to my house yet when you told me. I had time." "Still." He shook his head slightly. "I have a habit of thinking I need to be certain before I act. It's gotten people I care about hurt before." I thought of Derek in Colombia, 3 years of silence sitting between them. I thought of the argument Marcus had described only as something that got out of hand, which I'd come to understand involved Marcus staying quiet too long about things he should have said, and saying things too late that might have been forgiven earlier. The weight a man carries when he believes his silences have cost him. "You acted," I said. "That's what I know." He nodded slowly. He did that when he was accepting something instead of arguing with it. 6 weeks after Hartwell's arrest, I was finishing a late digitization project when Marcus appeared in the doorway of the records room at 8:30. "You have a call," he said, at my desk. "It's my son." I looked up. "He saw the news," Marcus said. "About the case. About the parking lot, my name in the report." He stopped. He called the main building number. I stood up. "Then go." "He asked for me by name," Marcus said, and his voice had something in it I'd never heard before, something fractured open. I haven't heard his voice in 3 years. "Marcus." I put my hand briefly on his arm as I passed him in the doorway. "Go answer the phone." I walked past the desk and made myself scarce in the break room until I heard his voice, low, careful, finding its way through something, and then I made even more noise getting my coffee so he'd know I wasn't listening. I don't know everything that was said in that call. Marcus told me afterward only that Derek wanted to meet for dinner the following weekend in Colombia. That his son had said he'd been proud, reading about what Marcus had done. That a 3-year silence was still echoing but perhaps not permanent after all. What Marcus told me in that quiet building at 8:45 on a Tuesday was something that has stayed with me since. I told him I'd been paying better attention lately, he said, to the things that matter. The Hartwell case went to trial that following spring. Marcus and I both testified. The prosecution played security footage Marcus had copied from the building's external cameras. Over the weeks he'd been documenting the sedan footage he'd preserved quietly, on his own initiative, because he wanted to understand what he was dealing with before he acted. The prosecutor called him a meticulous witness. Marcus sat straight in the chair and answered every question in his flat, precise way, and I watched 3 members of the jury nod along with his testimony. Hartwell received 14 years. Foss and Dupree accepted plea agreements and cooperated with federal prosecutors who were looking into whether similar schemes were operating in other counties. The title company where Dupree worked lost its state license. The 3 surviving homeowners whose properties had been fraudulently transferred got their deeds back before the end of the year. One of them was a woman named Elsie Brannigan, 81 years old, who had owned her home on Persimmon Street for 54 years. She came into our office when the reversal was processed and stood at Donna's desk and cried with the kind of relief that looked identical to grief. I brought her a chair and sat with her until her granddaughter arrived to take her home. Marcus met Derek for dinner in Columbia on a Saturday in August, and I spent that Saturday afternoon the way I always spent Saturdays now at the farmer's market on Broad Street, taking my time, not hurrying anywhere. My phone buzzed at 5:30. A text from Marcus. 2 hours. He's good. We're good. 3 words. I read them 3 times and then put my phone in my pocket and walked to the flower stall at the end of the row and bought myself dahlias in 3 colors, the kind of extravagance I'd stopped allowing when I was watching Every Dollar, and now allowed again because I was beginning to understand that some things cost nothing to give back to yourself. He brings Derek to Clover for the first time in September. They come to my house on Birchwood Lane on a Sunday afternoon. Derek lean and quiet like his father but with a warmer laugh, and the 3 of us sit on my back porch with iced tea and the last of the summer heat. Derek shakes my hand and says, "My dad says you bring him baked goods every week." He says that? I look at Marcus. Marcus looks at the yard. He talks about it a lot, actually, Derek says. "It's just whatever I make too much of," I say, which is always too much, because I still cook like there are 2 of us. Derek looks at me in the way that young people sometimes look at older people when they've heard something small and understood something large behind it. "I'm glad he has someone looking out for him," he says carefully. "We look out for each other," I say. "That's the arrangement. There's a woman in my department now, new this past spring, just starting over at 58 after a divorce that took her house and a decade of assumptions along with it. She comes in looking wrung out, the way I must have looked that first week, wearing the expression of someone recalculating everything from scratch. I noticed her eating lunch alone at her desk 3 days in a row. On the 4th day, I set a slice of coffee cake on her desk and said I always made too much. She looked up at me the way someone looks when they're not accustomed to being seen. I know that look. I've worn it. I tell her it gets better. Not easier, exactly, but better in the way that things get better when you keep showing up to them. She nods, and I can tell she's not quite sure she believes me yet, but she's willing to sit with the possibility. I believe it completely. I think about the green sedan in the parking lot and the silent weeks Marcus spent paying attention before he knew what to do with what he was seeing. I think about the notebook with its precise handwriting, every date and time, every plate number logged without drama. I think about sitting in Carl's office at 9:30 at night, both of us with our hands around paper coffee cups, and how one Tuesday's worth of attention redirected the whole current of what came next. The people who hurt those homeowners counted on no one paying attention. They counted on the kind of invisibility that settles over routine, the elderly woman who comes and goes on a predictable schedule, the security guard, no one greets at the door, the records clerk cross-referencing numbers in a basement office while the important work happens somewhere else. They needed everyone to stay in their lane and not look sideways. Marcus looked sideways. He looked sideways because someone had taken the time to see him, and because being seen after a long stretch of invisibility has a way of sharpening everything. The way coffee goes from warm to hot. The way lights come on. I know this because it's what happened to me too, after my husband died, in reverse. I was invisible to myself for months. I moved through the motions of a life, the house, the shift, the drive home in the dark, and nothing registered as worth noticing, including me. It was the accumulated small exchanges at the security desk that pulled me back toward the world. Not one large thing, 100 small ones. Good morning, here's something I baked. How's your week been? Real questions, listened to with real attention. What I gave Marcus was the habit of being noticed. What he gave me back was the reason it matters. Elsie Brannigan sends me a Christmas card now. She doesn't know my full role in everything, just that Donna's department found the problem and fixed it, but she knows my name from the office. Her card has a photograph of her house on Persimmon Street on the front, the way people used to send cards with photographs of their children. Her home is the entire content of the card, 2 stories, white with green shutters, the garden put to bed for winter, and her handwriting inside is large and deliberate, still here. I have it on my refrigerator. I am 67 now. I will work at the county records department for as long as the work is there and the knees cooperate. I will bake too much on weekends and bring the surplus to the building on Tuesday evenings, and Marcus will look at whatever I've brought with that expression he has, the one that is not quite a smile and more than a nod, and that will be sufficient. More than sufficient. Whatever is left of my life is going to be lived forward rather than backward. Not because the grief is gone, it isn't. My husband's warmth still absent in the mornings, still a hollow at the dinner table, but because the person sitting in the building at the end of the day, the person worth noting and being noted, that person is still here. Still here. That's everything, isn't it? That's the whole of it.